So the main event of UFC 262 this weekend is Charles Oliveira versus Michael Chandler. We all know why this fight is the main event, because obviously Dustin Poirier was, of course, since Khabib retired the belt, Dustin Poirier was the man, but he wanted to take the trilogy fight with Conor, which, why would you not? So the next best thing is Charles Oliveira, who's on a 7-fight winning streak, and Michael Chandler, who obviously was in Bellator, came into the UFC and knocked out number 5 or number 6 ranked at the time. I think he might have been number 5. Fighter Dan Hooker in the first round. And it's really interesting, this fight, because obviously they've both been in separate organisations for a long time. Charles Oliveira has been in the UFC since, my lord, he's been in the UFC since 2010. Jeez, I didn't even know that. He's been in the UFC since 2010. So 11 years with the promotion, and it's impressive to see that he's finally got the title shot that he's been kind of working towards. And when he entered the UFC, he even said himself that he was a boy and amongst lions, and now he is a lion amongst other lions, which is, you know, for the story of, and this is why this fight's actually quite compelling when you break it down. And I don't know, I watched the UFC Countdown show this morning, and obviously the embeddeds have started coming out. But when you break this down, you really think about it. For someone that's been in the UFC, I knew he'd been in the UFC 6 or 7 years. I didn't realise it was 11. Charles Oliveira, who has pretty much boy to man been in the UFC, and he's finally put himself on a 7-fight winning streak, of which he finished 6 of those. 4 or 5 of those were by submission. And then his kind of crowning performance against Tony Ferguson, who for years was the boogeyman in that division. You didn't want to fight Tony Ferguson. And he went in there and proved that he really belongs at the top of the 155-pound division. So for him to get a title shot after all that time in the UFC is such an incredible story. And the UFC, obviously, I'm sure, will do a very, very good job about telling that story. When you look at the flip side and you look at Michael Chandler, you've got the guy who was the king in Bellator for the longest time. I think he won the belt, lost the belt, but he was always the man at 155, and that's just the way that it was. He then was on a 2-fight win streak with Bellator. When he left the organisation, he then came into the UFC on a 2-fight win streak, having beaten Benson Henderson along the way, who of course was a former UFC lightweight champion. So there's always that thing around, oh, well, you know, Bellator don't have the best guys over there, but they've kind of got some old UFC guys who used to be the best. It's like you don't know until Michael Chandler comes over whether or not he is what he says he is. And the thing with Bellator is it's kind of like the UFC. There'll be 5 or 6 guys in Bellator that could probably fight right at the top of the UFC. And then there'll be a load that can't and a load that are really, really bad. But that's also the similar with the UFC. You will have some of the best guys in the world and probably a larger proportion of the best guys in the world in the UFC. But then there's also some that maybe could be there, maybe couldn't be there. And there's some that probably shouldn't be in there. And that's just the organisation. But on the whole, you would think that the UFC has the deepest amount of talent. But I digress. So Michael Chandler, of course, has come across from Bellator into the UFC, and there was all big questions around the Dan Hooker fight as to whether or not he could hang with the best guys in the division. Well, turns out he can. He knocked him out in about a minute and a half. Dan Hooker didn't look like Dan Hooker in that fight. He looked very tentative. He looked very scared against a smaller guy in Michael Chandler. But Michael Chandler can only beat who's in front of him, and he beat Dan Hooker handedly. So that, when the UFC is searching around for someone to have the title fight, you can't give it to McGregor because he's fighting Poirier. You can't give it to Poirier because he's fighting McGregor. You can't give it to Justin Gaethje because he lost his last fight. So all of a sudden, Charles Oliveira on a 7-fight winning streak is a no-brainer. You have to give him that title shot. He's put in the work. He stamped his card. He earned that title shot. Michael Chandler did not earn that title shot like Charles Oliveira did, but he deserves it. He really does. And there's no one else you can make a case for outside of Dustin Poirier that should have that fight. You couldn't have given it to Conor because he lost. You couldn't give it to Gaethje because he lost. Dustin Poirier is the one. He didn't want it. It has to be Michael Chandler. So I'm excited. I think it's a very, very compelling 155 fight. And not only does the winner of this become the UFC lightweight champion, the winner of this fights the winner of Dustin versus Conor. And if it's Dustin, that's great. It's another big marquee fight. If it's Conor, that's red panty night. And you really have cashed in your 155-pound title. And this fight means so much more than that gold belt.